Here's the stretch by Robinson. The 3-0 pitch. Swing a long drive. There it is. Number 500. The career 500 home run for Michael Jack Schmidt. And the Phillies have regained the lead in Pittsburgh. 8-6. And the Phillies dugout come swarming out to home plate.
Phillies Talk Podcast is now listener supported. Just go to our Patreon page at Patreon, patreon.com/Phillies, and you can sponsor this podcast.
Welcome to Phillies Talk, the independent podcast from FightinPhillies.com, featuring news and views about Phillies baseball.
Hi, this is Gary Matthews. You listen to the Fightin' Phillies podcast.
And hello and welcome to this edition of Phillies Talk Podcast for March 26th, 2017. Only 7 days to go till opening day. Big surprise there. It kind of snuck up on us, rather. The winter just seems to be closing out for us pretty good here in the Delaware Valley. And, of course, if you've watched any of the Phillies games down in Florida, of course, the great weather down there, we can only anticipate many great days of baseball to come here. Only 7 more days till opening day as of the day I'm doing this podcast. And today's show is a special show. I've got a excellent podcast co-host for this show, and Mr. Matthew Veasey is his name. And Matthew, welcome aboard the show.
Rich, how you doing? You can call me Matt.
Thank you very much, Matt. And you're a longtime Phillies blogger. Why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners? Let them know where you started out and currently what you're doing with your Phillies posts.
Well, I've been blogging on my own pretty much since I got on the internet, which was back in the fall of '97. But really started getting into some regular, form my own website back in 2004. That's at mattveasey.com, and that's MATTVEASEY.com. And I was doing a number of things, news-wise, social issues, that kind of thing, and always been a big Phillies fan. That's my main sports interest, so I've emphasized baseball a lot over the years, and I think it's about 2 or 3 years ago, I got involved with the Fansided organization, and I was writing at Fansided for their blog called That Ball's Out of Here, which is a Phillies site. After about 4 or 5 months of writing with them, I took over the editor's role and did that right through the end of last season. I gave up that role at the end of last season. It was just becoming really too much between my work schedule and the editorial responsibility, so I thought I could just go back to writing at my own site. But then I got an offer from Fansided to write with their primary baseball site, which is Call to the Pen, where it would be less responsibility. I would just be a writer. I wouldn't have to editorialize. So I've been writing with Call to the Pen since the end of last season, and I write on all types of baseball-related issues and topics and teams, but I still, because I'm from Philly and that's my interest, primarily I try to focus on the Phillies, especially when there's a big issue coming up.
Yeah, that's awesome. And these big companies that came into the blogosphere just a few years ago now, probably for so many years now, Fansided and some other big names in the blogosphere, they came up and gobbled up some of the blogs, and a lot of them were independent. They were very good, a lot of independent voices out there, and then, these companies came up and gobbled up some of the blogs. What's your feelings on that? How, this has transformed some of the independent blogs into sort of like a corporate type of mold?
I still write my own. I still keep up my own blog, and one of the things that I made sure of before I committed to Fansided was that I would be able to simulcast, or whatever you want to call it. I'd be able to take my pieces and also, put them, the ones that go up on Fansided, I'd also be able to put them on my own blog. So I've been, keeping my own blog up and independent. But I do know what you're talking about. I think it's almost inevitable. I was in the banking industry back in the 80s, And I remember when deregulation came to the banks. I remember looking down the road thinking, I worked for First Pennsylvania Bank and then Fidelity Bank. And I remember thinking, well, these banks, they're all gobbling each other up and buying each other out and consolidating. And then there's going to be a day where there's only 4 or 5, 6 big banks in the country. And a lot of people laughed at me, and I was nobody, young kid in my 20s. But I saw where it was going, and that's pretty much what's happened. I mean, the same thing's happening, I think, here. If there's good work being done out there, and a big fish sees it as, an asset that they can use, or something that'll be a positive addition to their brand, or just good competition that they rather have under their umbrella. I think it's just the natural progression of things.
Yeah, and it's awesome that they let you keep your content as your own and be able to bring it to your own blog and other blogs. And you also write for a number of different blogs in the Philadelphia area. Do you have any favorite Phillies blogs from over the years that you've really liked?
There are a number of people. I hesitate to point out anybody in particular, only because there are a handful of them that if I started naming their names, everybody would recognize their names in the Philadelphia area. I mean, The Good Fight does a nice job. There are just a bunch of them. Fansided does a nice job. That Ball's Out of Here. The people that are there now, there's a couple of their writers that are really good. That's the tough thing, I think, for these blogs, where you're not making a lot of money, if any, in some cases. And so when you have younger people who are writing for them who eventually do have an opportunity to make money somewhere, they leave. So it's hard to keep a talented young staff. And then when you do get an older writer, sometimes it's somebody who's not really very experienced, or it's something they're doing on a lark or a hobby. So the quality of the writing isn't that good. It's tough. I can tell from doing the 2 years of writing of editorializing with That Ball's Out of Here, that it's tough to keep a really good quality staff together, for any length of time when you're not offering money. So I think that's the challenge for a lot of the blogs that are out there.
Yeah, and it's not easy. You read a blog and, you go through a few paragraphs, this, that, and the other, and if you've never done it before, it's not that easy. It might take you 30 minutes, 45 minutes to write a post. You've got to do research. You've got to check your facts. You got to sort of make sure everything is right. And it's just not easy being a writer. So we've got to tip our caps to those bloggers out there, the independent bloggers, and, of course, the podcasters out there as well. They're an extra voice, an independent-style voice, if you will. Talking about baseball, and we're talking about the 2017 season here. The Phillies about to embark onto a brand new season, and we're not expecting too much out of them this year again. It's been a few years of that, but this constant rebuild seems to be taking place with the Phillies, and I know the new management has only had a year and a half or two under their belt so far of taking their chance at rebuilding the Phillies. Of course, Ruben Amaro was supposed to be doing this right after the Phillies won the World Series. They repeated in 2009. Then things sort of rolled down a very steep hill since about 2010, 2011, so to speak. So we're 5-6 years into a slide of this team, and I didn't anticipate the slide would be this bad for the Phillies. I kind of thought they would contend for a few years after 2009, of course. How do you feel about that, Matt?
Well, I mean, of course, too, but the record stands for itself. They did contend for a few years after 2009. If you want to belabor the point, I mean, obviously in 10 and 11 they were contenders. They were serious contenders both years. And in 2011 they had the best regular season in franchise history. So I think at that point, but that was the high point. But in retrospect, it's always easy to look back and point to things in retrospect. But now we all see that Ryan Howard's collapse injury at the end of the 2011 NLDS against the Cardinals, everybody puts that as a kind of an exclamation point to the end of the era, if you will. The 2012 team went 500, and they started breaking up the band, if you will. And then after that, it really started collapsing. Injuries maybe a little sooner than they should have come to Halladay and Lee. And then the aging of the position players all at once. It was a snowball, but I think some of the younger players that they banked on, I'm not going to say that I've got some great crystal ball, but I mean, I saw a Dominic Brown and a Cody Ashe for not being everything they were being sold to be, and I just don't see how professional talent evaluators couldn't see it, or maybe were unwilling to see it because they had invested so much money and time and reputation into those players. Maybe they were unwilling to cut them loose, early when they did recognize it. So, I mean, I think that the biggest problem for me was that the Phillies didn't seem, from the outside, they didn't seem to be recognizing the problems that they were running into with personnel and making the right decisions quick enough to make a change from those people that they had committed to. Now, whether they didn't see it, or whether because they had so much already invested in them, they were giving them a longer leash than they should have. For one reason or another, it took too long to make that changeover. But it is what it is. It cost Amaro his job here. We have the regime change. They've made some super draft picks, I think, in the last few years. Again, we'll see how they turn out. And it's just that process of waiting for the young players to come. And they're coming. We've seen them come on the pitching staff over the last couple of years with Eichhoff, Nola, Velasquez, Jake Thompson's on the verge, Zach Eflin, even before his injury last year. The pitching staff, a guy like Hector Neris emerging in the bullpen. The pitching staff has some good young pieces who've come, and I think that are going to be here for the most part to help this team for years going forward. It's the position players now where we have to start to see some turnover. Last year we got Tommy Joseph. Maikel Franco is, at least he's starting, to emerge and tap his potential. I think he has a lot more that he can offer. And, of course, Odubel Herrera came out of nowhere as a Rule 5 pick. Those are the only maybe 2 or 3 guys there who I see as being around long term. I'm really looking forward to this next wave, if you will, of the position players.
Yeah, that sounds great. And as you said, there's always an optimism about opening day, a brand new season with the Phillies. They have nowhere to go but up. They've been on the bottom for the last couple years, and they really haven't excelled under Pete Mackanin. I know he's been a longtime Phillies coach before he got the manager position. He's been around baseball his whole life. But really, I mean, if you look at last year and the year before that, you have to grade the Phillies, in my explanation, as not a failure, but very close to it. They were near the bottom of the whole Major League Baseball in batting and darn near in pitching. And you just can't have that. Of course, the Phillies in 2017 have a new hitting coach in Matt Stairs. And that's another thing. I think the Phillies coaches should have been replaced a long time ago with Steve Henderson. And certainly the pitching coach should have been replaced a long time ago. There's just no excuse for that. And like you were saying, the Phillies hung on to some of those players, and we loved them. We didn't want to see them go. The Chase Utley, Jimmy Rollins. For the most part, Ryan Howard had his supporters. He had his detractors. But we didn't want to see those guys go for the most part. And, Ruben Amaro had a tough time of deciding who should stay, who should go. But, we're looking forward to the future. And as you said, Maikel Franco is supposed to be the big star. He's carried a little bit of the load for the Phillies. We're looking for Odubel Herrera to have a better year this year. They've signed him for 5 years, $30 million. What do you think of that contract, the Odubel Herrera contract? Do you think he's worth that kind of money in that time?
You know what? He's he emerged so quickly, and it was a good time for a player like Odubel to get an opportunity with a team like the Phillies because they were in transition. There were opportunities to be had. There were roles to be had. But I'll say this to his credit, he seized the opportunity. He took it and ran with it. He was not a natural center fielder. He still battles the position from time to time, but he obviously improved last year over the year before. So, and he's definitely a positive. He's a plus offensive player. So what his ceiling is, he's talking about winning a batting title. I'm not sure if that's a possibility, but he's a positive piece for them. I don't think that is a huge investment. If he fell flat on his face for some reason with the financial position that the Phillies are in, they're committing maybe like $6 million a year to him. I don't think that's a large commitment. So I really think it's a very team-friendly contract. And if he tops out, if he has another level to go to, if he continues to improve defensively, if he can step up to a batting title, level of player, then it's a steal. It's an outright steal. So I'm fine with the Odubel contract. I think it's a smart move at this point, and hopefully it continues that way.
I just have to look back to the days of Pete Rose and Mike Schmidt on the Phillies. I can't seem to equate the money that some of these ball players are making nowadays with, number one, their efforts on the field. To pay Pete Rose $2.5 to $3 million back in 1980 was like a king's ransom. But compared to today's player, your average relief pitcher's getting $8, $9, $10 million a year, and that's still a big chunk of change. And it's amazing how baseball salaries have escalated over the years.
Yeah, well, Rose, the one thing I remember when they signed, Rose wasn't making $1 million with the Phillies. And I believe at the time they signed him as a free agent, I was a big Phillies fan. Still at that time, I was 17 years old when they signed Rose. And I believe he made just short of $1 million. He did not make $1 million a year. And his was the highest contract at the time in baseball. They're talking about, of course, we're talking about 37, 38 years ago now. But Rose wasn't making $1 million. I don't know if he ever made $1 million in his career as a player. He probably got close to it, but they were different times. I'm sure Schmidt made more than $1 million at some point, but I'm sure the players who were playing back in the 50s and 60s would have looked at Rose and Schmidt and said, "Oh my God." Dick
Sure.
Allen would probably look at what Schmidt and Rose were making and say, "Jesus, I wish I would have, come along a generation later." And the same thing with Rose. I'm sure it was like if Rose would have been playing in the 90s, if Schmidt would have been playing in the 90s and the aughts, these are guys that would have been making $10, $20 million a year. I mean, if they're playing today, you're talking about, $20+ million a year, maybe $30 million a year players.
That's for sure. Yeah, the
They're
time.
Hall of Famers.
Yeah, and the time and the money just seem to have taken a big turn. A lot of these players making a bundle of money nowadays. The Phillies picked up a couple off-season pickups this year in Howie Kendrick and Michael Saunders. And how much of that do you think was just like the Phillies were looking around on their stat sheet and their salary sheet and says, we've got a very low-paid team here. We've got to go out and spend some money. Do you have that impression of these pickups, or do you think they actually have a role with these Phillies team in 2017 and maybe even 18?
Well, they definitely have a role in 2017. It's just what is that role? Howie Kendrick and Michael Saunders, they're not unknown commodities. These are guys with a track record. They're both now on the other side of 30, I believe. Maybe it's Saunders, just turned 30. These aren't like up-and-coming, star players who are going to elevate this team to a winning level. I don't think that that's the purpose of Kendrick and Saunders. I think that the Kendrick Saunders purpose is we're looking to buy a little more time. Another 6 months, 3 months, a year, to try to get Roman Quinn, who I'm extremely high on. I always have been. I think he's an exciting, difference-making, top-of-the-order type talent with the rub of trying to stay healthy. So I think that, the Phillies as an organization have to make sure that Quinn can stay healthy. They have to see Nick Williams rebound from his inconsistencies of last year and actually start reaching his potential. And I think it says a lot, frankly, about Aaron Altair. I don't think that they are, sold that Altair is a everyday player. If they were, I think you wouldn't have seen one or the other of Kendrick or Saunders signed. So I think what it is Kendrick and Saunders are here for the same reason that Hellickson and Buchholz are here in the rotation, to just buy some time. Whether that's a few months to get the team to the past the All-Star break and towards the trade deadline this year, and then we can start moving some of these guys, even if it's for small pieces, with the idea that now Williams and Quinn and maybe a J.P. Crawford, that type of thing, some of the young pitchers like Jake Thompson, they're ready, fully ready to step up and become full-time regular major leaguers going forward into 2018. That's my hope, even if it's to buy another full year. If it's for Saunders and Kendrick to play out this season and next year we go to all the kids, I think they're space fillers, time savers for the Phillies.
Yes, indeed. I was looking forward to seeing Aaron Altair this year. I kind of thought he would come out of spring training with a position, but we also saw Brock Stassi have a great spring for the Phillies. Do you see anything for him in the 2017 team that's going to go north to Philadelphia in just a week?
Well, I did a piece for Fansided for Call to the Pen probably about earlier this week before the Phillies started making their roster cuts, because I didn't want to be a cheater. So I didn't want to wait until they already had sliced half the spring roster down. So I did a crystal ball piece of who I thought would make the ball club. And I actually had them making the team. So I think it's going to be tough here to see Stassi make the team, but they're trying to get him some corner outfield work. To me, he really is just a first baseman, but they tried this a little bit with Ashe, trying to squeeze him into a corner outfield role when he was at third base for a while. So if Stassi can show that he can play some corner outfield, he's earned it. I mean, I am huge on if a guy shows that he has the talent to be considered for the major leagues, and Stassi has that level of talent. He wasn't maybe one of their top 20 or 30 prospects necessarily over the last year or so, but he was on the radar, and now he's given an opportunity and he's running with it. I mean, I am all for players who produce. You should give them some kind of chance. So for me, I had Stassi making the roster, and I think that he's going to make it. And we'll see. How long does he stay? How much chance does he get to play if he's up here? Can he keep producing? When he's facing true day in day out big league pitching, he's going to be. If he does play, he's going to be coming off the bench and pinch hitting for the most part. So it'll be a tough role to fill. So I think that he can make this ball club, and I had him making the ball club in my prediction. But I don't see him being a difference maker type player. I just think he's earned the opportunity.
You're listening to Phillies Talk Podcast, the longest running independent Phillies podcast out there, and I'm talking with Matt Veasey. He's a independent blogger, and you can find him at mattveasey.com, among other places. Call to the Pen, a Phillies blog in the Philadelphia area. And Matt, we spoke a little bit before the show about Pat Venditti, Phillies picking him up as a relief pitcher, and I really didn't see too much of him out there in the American League, but he's kind of unique, an ambidextrous relief pitcher. That should be interesting this year.
Yeah, he's been in the major leagues for a couple of years. He pitched with the Oakland and Toronto and Seattle organizations. He had some. I remember first seeing him when he came up in 2015 with the A's, and he had some success back then. And of course, the whole ambidextrous thing. He didn't have a really good year last year when he got an opportunity with either Toronto or Seattle. So I mean, that's why he's out there. A guy like that, he's not a guy that's going to make a difference. I don't even know that he's going to make the Phillies opening day roster. He's not a kid. He's not like an up-and-coming prospect. He's 31 years old. So I think at this point it's a curiosity. He's a guy who, he can pitch. He has pitched in the big leagues. But I don't see him as being some difference maker, and I don't see I don't see him getting out righties or lefties on some particularly effective level, more than either of the others. It seems like a curiosity to me. If he sticks with the team, it might be more, down to AAA with a chance because he has some big league experience to maybe step up and help them if they need a bullpen arm at some point later in the season, spring, summer, whatever.
Should be
interesting story, obviously, with the ambidextrous pitching, but I don't think it's more than an interesting story.
Yeah, it should be cool to look at that this season. Just starting up in about a week from today. And Phillies also picked up Chris Coghlan in the offseason. I was always a big fan of Chris Coghlan when he was with the Marlins. Of course, he was with the Chicago Cubs, the World Series winning Cubs. He's getting a ring this year. Good for him. Always been a fan of his, and I've always thought he's hit well at Citizens Bank Park. What do you see out of him this year?
Well, I hate to start sounding maybe like a broken record here, but I'm not saying I'm anything against Chris Coghlan. He's put a nice little career together for himself, for a guy who does a lot of little things right, but he doesn't do any one thing great. So he's definitely a bench reserve type player. 2009 Rookie of the Year when he came up with the Marlins. Had a nice season that year, hit 321, but he's never had an offensive season like that since. He hit 16 home runs with the Cubs a couple of years ago when he got a lot of playing time, stole 11 bases, which were both career highs. But he's a 260 career hitter, and that's over almost 3,000 plate appearances. So I think he's one of these guys that is he's a professional ball player. He's not going to embarrass himself out there. He can handle big league pitching, but this is not a difference maker. This is a guy on the other side of 30 again who is filling a role. I think he's better at filling that role for a contender like he did with the Cubs. With a team like the Phillies, I'm just not. I'm hoping he doesn't take any at-bats or plate appearances or time away from any time during the year from a guy like Quinn or a guy like Williams when they're ready. So as a bench guy, I'm fine with him. I think that he's going to make the team because the Phillies seem to like having this kind of 30-plus, veteran, unflappable kind of, decent ball player out there, but I don't see him as any major difference maker.
Yeah, I think a lot of the work that he does might be in the clubhouse, like the camaraderie of a team, help solidifying that sort of thing. It seems like he's been a part of some interesting teams over the years, but he has hit pretty well at Citizens Bank Park, so it'll be interesting to see him get a couple at-bats this season. Well, let's take a short break here on the podcast, and then we'll be wrapping it up on the other side. I'm talking to Matt Veasey from MattVeasey.com, a Phillies blogger. And Matt, we'll talk on the other side of this commercial.
Sounds good, Rich.
Sponsor an ad on the Phillies Talk podcast. Support our show and let people know about your business. Email us today. Follow us on Twitter at Fightin' Phillies or on our website, fightinphillies.com.
Hi, this is Farley.
And Mark from Baseball PhD.
Thanks for listening to BaseballPodcast.net.
Up next, another great episode of Phillies Talk.
Hi, this is Gary Matthews. You're listening to Fightin' Phillies Talk Podcast.
Brewtown Sports is your source for Brewers news and notes. Join Mr. Brewtown as he keeps you up to date on all the happenings of your Milwaukee Brewers and Major League Baseball. Follow the show on Facebook and Twitter, Brewtown Sports. Listen 24/7 at BrewtownSports.podomatic.com.
Hi, this is Gary Mack of Mets Musing, and you're listening to my good friend Rich Baxter on Phillies Talk, right here on BaseballTalkRadio.com, the home of great baseball talk shows.
And welcome back to Phillies Talk Podcast. Opening day in about a week for the Phillies. A couple days later, they'll open up in Philadelphia, April 7th. And I can't wait. I just made my plans. I'm going to attend opening day, so I'm real pumped up about it. Usually am for opening day, and then things have tended to go downhill a little bit. And I'm talking with Matt Veasey from mattveasey.com. You can check out his Phillies articles. And Matt, we talked a little bit about the show before the show started about Jimmy Rollins, Chase Utley, and Ryan Howard, their legacy with the Phillies. I was reading a couple articles about, they weren't giving their numbers out yet, and they weren't sure, Phillies management, whether they would give them out anytime too soon. Do you think the Phillies are going to think about retiring any one of their numbers?
I don't know what the team is going to do, obviously. I know that they've developed this policy. I don't know if it's, I'm sure it's not a written policy. It seems to be an informal policy that they only are going to retire numbers of players who reach the Hall of Fame. So if that's going to be the exclamation point, that bottom line, there's no change to that policy, then it's going to be tough. Howard is not a Hall of Famer. Every one of those players we're talking about, and I would add Cole Hamels onto that group, they're all Wall of Famers. They're all going to be Phillies legends for as long as the Phillies exist. So we're all going to remember them, hopefully for decades to come. They are a historical part. I'm probably the greatest run of any Phillies team in history, including the one that I grew up with in the late 70s to the early 80s. So, this was a historic team. So, but I think that Howard, while he was the dominant slugger in baseball for 4 or 5 years, he doesn't have enough of a full career, and his last handful of years were so on the downswing that he doesn't have a chance at the Hall of Fame. Now, Utley and Rollins, I am personally, if I had a vote, to me, they're going to be Hall of Famers. But neither one of them, I think, is going to be a slam dunk. So they're going to be the type of player that we'll see what their final numbers are and their final trophy cases are, and they're going to, people are going to talk about them and argue them, and somebody's going to, fight for them. And so I think it's going to be tough. And Hamels, he's probably still got another handful of years at least to pitch at an effective level. So we don't know where his career is going to go ultimately. I think Hall of Fame, is a tough sell on any of them right now. None are slam dunk Hall of Famers. So that's going to become the issue. I think that all of them, all 4 of them, and I made this point in a piece about 2 weeks ago at Call to the Pen, that the Phillies should retire some of those 2008 Heroes numbers. And I think that they should retire all the guys that we talked about. Utley's 26, Howard 6, Rollins 11, Cole Hamels, they should all be retired. This was a historic team. This was a team that generations of Phillies fans, and especially the younger generation of Phillies fans that didn't, like I did, get to see the 1980 team, maybe not even the 1993 team. People that grew up with this team in the last, decade and a half, these are their players, and they weren't just good players. These were great players. Whether they step up to be a Hall of Famer, quote, or not, I think it should be irrelevant. To me, these are guys that deserve to be, and this team deserves to not just be on the Wall of Fame, but they deserve to have that Schmidt, Carlton, level of, we won a championship. These were the very most elite players on the team, and they should be honored. They were all fan favorites. You couldn't take any one of them out of the equation and win a championship. These were all irreplaceable players. I think a guy like Chooch, beloved guy, he should be a Wall of Famer. But I don't think you can make the argument that if you take Chooch out of the equation, they don't win a championship. I think you can make that argument about Utley, Rollins, Hamels, Ryan Howard. So to me, all of those four should have their numbers retired.
Yeah, they were certainly important pieces to the puzzle for the Phillies, and I like that. I don't think a team should retire a player's number unless they reach the Hall of Fame. That's a great criteria to use. And out of the four players, I think really Jimmy Rollins has the best shot of getting in to the Hall of Fame someday. He's compared with a lot of Hall of Famers already in his career, however long it goes. I think he's going to play in 2017. I haven't read too much about him. I think I heard Chicago White Sox maybe. But if they can hang around for a couple years in their late 30s, it's going to solidify their chances of making the Hall of Fame. Again, out of the four, I think only Rollins could make it in, possibly, but we'll have to see. And one other guy we were wanting to talk about on this podcast, we talked about the Phillies Wall of Fame. If you're not familiar with it, it's a nice section of Citizens Bank Park out there in left center field where you can go out and see a nice plaque of your favorite Phillies over the years. They get voted in over the last few years, and it's something very nice to see. And we were both wondering, and I was wondering, if Pete Rose will ever be out there on that Wall of Fame.
Well, Pete's, like I said, I grew up with that, that team from the late 70s and then into the early 80s. Pete was irreplaceable for that team. That was a extremely talented team. They won 101 games 2 years in a row. They signed Rose as the missing piece. Now, of course, the first year that they signed him, they dropped to fourth place. But I don't think that was in any way you can blame that on Rose. There were some injury problems. The team was just not responding anymore to Danny Ozark. So I really think that there were a lot of factors besides Rose. Almost to a man, you hear people talk, and certainly Mike Schmidt's been very vocal about it over the decades, that Rose made the difference in teaching them how to win, in getting them to have confidence. If you want to talk about a guy in the clubhouse, Pete Rose was that guy, to light a fire, to spark, let them know just how hard they had to play for 162 games if they wanted to actually win a division, how hard you had to play if you wanted to fight your way to the World Series, which they did in what I still think is the best NLCS ever against Houston in 1980. Pete Rose was the difference maker on those Phillies, even though they had Hall of Famers on that team. Even though they had all-stars on that team, to me, Gold Glovers, Rose was the irreplaceable part. Now, he was here for, I believe he was here for 4 or 5 years. I believe it was 5 years. And I've had some people say, well, he wasn't here that long. He wasn't here like at the peak of his career. Well, I didn't hear those complaints about Jim Thome. Jim Thome was only here really contributing for about 3 years. So, I thought that was more of a, I love Jim Thome. I was grateful for what he did for a couple of years here, but a Wall of Fame spot, before guys like Manny Trio, before a guy even like Bobby Abreu. I mean, it was, to me, I think it was a popularity contest that they were looking to get Tomei on there last year. I could see maybe, throwing Jim a spot on there somewhere down the road, but there were other people that were ahead of him to me. Rose is at least everything that Tomei was, but he was more because he was a world champion, and he was here longer. So to me, there's no doubt. I mean, I think it's going to happen this year. I think that's the way it's lined up, and I hope it happens this year. I was a big Pete Rose fan. I still am. I understand all the the other issues involving gambling and such, but I think there's a lot of haze to that gambling issue. I think there's a lot that we don't know. I'm convinced that he didn't bet against his own team when he was a manager. So I really don't have any qualms about putting Rose on the wall, and I hope he's on it. And I'll go out there this year to that game if they're putting him on the Wall of Fame.
Sure. If the Phillies want to oversell a stadium, I think you'll see that with the Pete Rose Wall of Fame celebration. And they just recently got the permission to do it. So I think we'll be seeing that, as you said, in the near future. And hopefully when he's alive. I mean, the guy's getting a little older now. There's been talk about his possible inclusion in the Hall of Fame. That would have to be another hurdle he would have to jump. He's 75 years old now, so I hope they make that decision soon. He'll be 76 in a couple of months, a few short months here.
That is an issue. And, in talking about age and talking about the Wall of Fame, I think it would be remiss, since we're doing this on Sunday the 26th, not to mention today would have been Harry Kalas's 81st birthday. So there was certainly a classic guy, and certainly glad we got Harry, on the Wall of Fame while he was still with us. I know he was, honored by that, and just a little RIP and shout out to Harry on his 81st birthday today.
Wow, I didn't even realize that, and yeah, how much the fans miss Harry Kalas. He was so much part of our lives for many years, just an institution in the Phillies organization. Really miss him still to this day, Harry Kalas. Happy birthday, Harry. But looking over the Pete Rose stats here, I had a minute while you were talking, Matt, and yeah, you're right. He didn't make more than $1 million from the Phillies. His contract, as it stuck in my mind somewhere, was $3.2 million over 4 years. So here you have, in my opinion, one of the greatest baseball players of all time, and didn't even make more than $1 million in a season from the Phillies. He did make the $1 million mark from the Cincinnati Reds in the last year of his playing days. He was a player-manager in 1986 as a 45-year-old. Believe that or not, but very interesting there on Pete Rose, and I hope we get to see him in 2017. I hope the Phillies don't spoil that chance of bringing one of the greatest players that has ever played the game back to Philadelphia. Let the fans have it.
I think one last thing. We'll go as long as you want, but you mentioned earlier Pete Mackanin. What you thought about Pete Mackanin, or where he was going. To me, the jury is still out on Pete, but I don't want to throw Pete under the bus because they've lost to this point. Because I remember we're talking about Rose and the Cincinnati Reds, and everybody knows Sparky Anderson. Hall of Fame manager. He took the Tigers and the Reds to the World Series, the Big Red Machine, multiple times. And I remember growing up and hearing Sparky Manager say things a bit like that managers don't win ball games. He had one famous quote where he said, "I don't believe a manager ever won a pennant." He's talking about Casey Stengel winning all his pennants with the Yankees. I've never seen a team win a pennant without players. I think the only thing the manager has to do is keep things within certain boundaries. So I think, Pete is a guy who everybody knew deserved a shot, and he's getting that shot, but he hasn't had the players. So I'll be interested to see, do the Phillies give him a chance to stick around long enough until he's got some players, if you follow my drift. So, that'll be interesting to me to see if they don't someday throw him aside for some bigger name manager once they start signing some bigger name players, or do they give Pete the chance to have grown as a manager and stick around once they do have the better players?
Yes, that will be an interesting point to remember for Phillies fans, and check that out. It seems like Mickey Morandini is moving up the ladder pretty good with the Phillies. I wouldn't be surprised if he wasn't named the next Phillies manager at one point or another. I don't think that Matt Klentak is interested in bringing these high-paid outside of the organization guys in to manage the Phillies for the next manager, whoever it may be and whenever it may be. But I kind of see Mickey Morandini climbing up that ladder pretty fast with the Phils. We'll have to see what happens with him.
Yep, that's for another day. I mean, the team needs to start bringing in its young, those younger talented position players, and it's really on those players. It's on the J.P. Crawfords, it's on the Nick Williams, it's on the Jorge Alfaros to push their way to the big leagues now. I mean, these are guys that are sitting right there on the verge of it. 2017 should be the year where they, down there at Lehigh Valley, AAA, up there from Philadelphia, that should be an exciting team, and that should be where we see 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 guys who say, over the next 3 or 4 months, say, I want to be in Philadelphia, I'm ready to play in the big leagues, and start putting up some good numbers, playing some exciting ball, and making it impossible for the Phillies to keep them down on the farm. That's where a lot of my attention is going to be.
Very good, and that's Matt Veasey from mattveasey.com. Matt, let the listeners know where they can find you on social media, and I appreciate you being on this edition of Phillies Talk.
All right, Rich, the main place you can find me is on my Twitter feed, which is at Matthew Veasey. It's MATTHEW, V as in Victor, EA, S as in Sam, EY. So Matthew Veasey is my Twitter feed. You can find my work on my website at mattveasey.com. And I'm also on Fansided all the time. My work for Major League Baseball is there. It's they can just go to Call to the Pen to the website, and I'm at Call to the Pen. My actual address with them would be Call to the Pen /author /Mattman3rd, MATTMAN 3RD. So those are the main places where you can find my work right now.
Very great. Well, thanks for appearing on this edition of Phillies Talk, and I hope to talk to you as the year progresses.
Rich, anytime. Appreciate it.
Sponsor an ad on the Phillies Talk podcast. Support our show and let people know about your business. Email us today. Follow us on Twitter at Fightin' Phillies or on our website, fightinphillies.com. Thanks for listening to Phillies Talk. We'll have much more baseball talk on our next show.